Hi, my name is Anne-Marie Barton, and I am going to be presenting for energy and the environment. And I'm asking today, is a dam worth it? And hopefully you'll be able to answer that question at the end of this presentation of a brief history and the modern problems of Glen Canyon Dam. So Glen Canyon Dam is located in Glen Canyon, of course. You can see a picture of Glen Canyon Dam below. Glen Canyon Dam was chosen to be created in Glen Canyon because its basin could hold an immense amount of water. There were supportive canyon walls and bedrock, and it was economically feasible. It is a concrete arch dam that's 710 feet high, 210 feet long. It is 60 feet at its base and 25 feet at its crest. The reservoir that it creates is Lake Powell, and the river at its head is the Colorado River. Lake Powell has a storage capacity of 25.16 million acre feet, and it cost $245 million to build the dam. Now, over the course of energy production, that price has been paid back. It has an estimated effective life for the power generation station of 700 to 1,000 years, and that's only due to silt buildup on the lake side of the dam. The purpose of the dam is primarily water management, so they wanted to regulate the flow of the river and have some space to store water if there was drought. It is also primarily for recreation and reclamation. So a lot of the water goes to drinking and to agricultural use, but also to things like boating and swimming. And millions of people actually visit the lake every year. And then, of course, hydroelectric generation, even though that wasn't its primary purpose, it is about 79% of the total Colorado River storage project capacity for power generation. We know that dams can do some pretty big environmental damage, and so one of the main things that is also done at Glen Canyon Dam is environmental protection. They actually signed their environmental impact statement in 1996 and then began an adaptive management program. We're actually going to see some of the experiments and work that was done through that adaptive management program in the rest of this presentation. So a little bit of dam background, dam history specifically. Glen Canyon Dam was authorized by Congress in April of 1956. It continues to keep its authorization. The first blast of dynamite was in October of 1956. And the bridge was built in January of 1959. The bridge actually had to be built first so that they could get the materials to build the dam from one side to the other. Then the river had to be diverted, and you can actually see a diversion tunnel. That's the biggest picture there. And the diversion tunnels were dug into both sides of the canyons, and the leftover materials were actually used to build the cofferdam, which can be seen in the foreground of the picture with the bridge in it. And then the river had to be excavated to bedrock, which you can see the excavation to bedrock picture there as well. And the canyon walls had to be secured. So a lot of energy went into pre-construction of the dam. So then the first bucket of concrete was able to be poured in June of 1960. They continued to work 24 hours a day until September of 1963. So a lot of energy went into those 3 years to build the dam as quickly as possible. And over 400,000 buckets of concrete were actually placed. There was a concrete factory on site as well as an ice plant to help with that cooling process of, the hot concrete. Diversion tunnels were closed in March of 1963, and 17 years later, Lake Powell was actually full for the first time, and that picture there is a picture of the lake at full capacity. Power generation first began in 1964, and so a year after the dam was completed, they were able to get that first turbine up and running. All 8 electrical generators that are now in the dam were fully operational by 1966. And then just for a little bit of history, spillways were used for the first time in 1983, and there was a major problem with the spillways. They were able to redesign and reconstruct them, but a lot of energy, went into it being broken and them trying to fix it, and they haven't actually had to use them since. So overall, there was a massive amount of energy that's gone into building the dam and into maintaining the dam, but there is a lot of energy that also comes out of the dam. And let's actually talk a little bit about that energy. So power generation at the dam is clean, renewable, reliable. As we learned in Module 7, hydroelectric is one of the best renewables, or at least one of the cleanest renewables. There are 8 turbines and 8 penstocks for pulling in water. There is a minimum power pool, though, of 3,490 feet, so under that elevation, power generation would not be possible. There's a total capacity of 1,320 megawatts, and they produce about 4.5 billion kilowatt hours annually. Now, Bureau of Reclamation said that it would take about 2.5 million tons of coal or 11 million barrels of oil to generate that same amount of energy. There is a switchyard by the dam, and you can see the picture of the switchyard as well as a picture of the turbines and the penstocks in the slide here. There are 2 345 kilovolt transmission lines to Phoenix and 230 kilovolt transmission line to Farmington, New Mexico. And Reclamation, so Bureau of Reclamation, actually transferred power marketing rights and transmission functions to Western Area Power Administration. We're going to hear a little bit more about them in the next couple slides. But day-to-day operation and maintenance is performed by Glen Canyon Division of the Power Office. And water releases through the power plant fluctuates as it responds to power system load changes, peak load demands, regulation of the power system, and power system emergencies. And speaking of emergencies, the dam is actually the primary unit for black starts. So if a power grid has a blackout failure, energy from the dam is actually the thing that helps reboot that system. So kind of cool. So just a little dam comparison. Hoover Dam is really similar to Glen Canyon Dam. It's 726 feet tall. It produces about 4 billion kilowatt hours annually. It has 17 turbines, and its last generating unit was completed in 1961. The Grand Coulee Dam is 550 feet tall, produces about 21 billion kilowatt hours annually. It has 9 turbines, and it was completed in 1974. So we get to see the largest dam in the United States and the dam that generates the most electricity, and they're both pictured there. So Glen Canyon Dam is part of the Colorado River Storage Project, and it actually carries out the Western Area Power Administration's mission, specifically in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Wyoming, and Texas. It's marketed as Salt Lake City area / integrated projects. And the Western Area Power Administration specifically services about 1.2 million homes a year. And they sell electricity to towns, cities, rural electric cooperatives, Native American tribes, irrigation districts, and federal and state agencies. So the power that is created at Glen Canyon Dam impacts a lot of people, not just in Arizona, but all across the West. So Western Area Power Administration really takes into consideration their stakeholders, and that is both their customers and the environment. And so they are actually the ones who manage the environmental impact of the dam, and they do environmental studies. And we're going to, again, hear some of those environmental studies. So some dam customers, the Western Area Power Administration is primarily a wholesaler of hydropower. They have a 15-state area. They sell to more than 685 firm and non-firm wholesale power customers. They also have some end-use customers as well. They really work to have creditworthiness to protect their customers in case someone defaults. And the Reclamation Project Act of 1939 actually requires them to give preference to certain types of nonprofit organizations seeking to purchase federal power, and that includes Native American tribes. So it's really important that tribal members are able to get this power that comes from Glen Canyon Dam. And it makes sense, at least in my mind, that a lot of the less expensive energy would go to the people who were impacted most by the dam, and that was definitely the indigenous groups in the area. And here are some actual customers of the WAPA that get energy from Glen Canyon Dam. So the dam does cause some problems, and we're going to look at two major problems that are faced at Glen Canyon Dam. The first one is aquatic biota. So in the Colorado River, especially at the head of Lake Powell, there are humpback chub. The humpback chub are actually listed as an endangered species, and the construction of the dam really changed their habitat. It changed water temperature, it changed shifts in currents and flows, and it also can affect the turbidity of the water in the river. And beyond that, they had the introduction of sport fish, specifically rainbow trout and brown trout, which are the two fish at the bottom. The humpback chub is the one on top that is showed as endangered. Rainbow trout are actually a key factor in the survival of the humpback chub, and so they realized at the dam that they needed to do something to fix the rainbow trout population to help the humpback chub population. They could have done mechanical removal, they could have increased the turbidity levels by changing sediment levels at Marble Canyon, or they could do a trout management flow where they released specific amounts of water from the dam to simulate flooding. And that is actually what they did primarily, was the trout management flows. And with that effort, they were able to downlist the humpback chub to threatened in 2021, which is a really big win for the humpback chub. However, it's a little bit less of a win for power generation because they had to divert the water that they released in the trout management flow from different releases. So it was not able to be released through the turbine penstocks. Something similar happened in other experiments. So there were reduced flows to help with aquatic plants and vertebrates, and they actually found that they were exposing parts of the riverbed, and that affected organisms low on the food chain. And when they did that, it had an impact, at least slightly, on rainbow trout. And so changing flows at Glen Canyon not only affects power generation for humans, but it affects the energy distribution in the biota. And generally, to help manage macroinvertebrates, there is a macroinvertebrate production flow, and it's also known as the bug flow. And when they did the bug flow, they released less water, and as they did that, they again didn't have as much water to pass through the turbines to generate electricity, and it actually cost the WAPA $1.154 million in lost electrical profits. So something similar has been happening with the smallmouth bass. Smallmouth bass are actually an invasive species downstream of Glen Canyon Dam. And to help with these invasive species, they wanted to change the temperature in the water downstream to help disrupt the spawning of the smallmouth bass. And there were a couple options that could help with that. And here are those 5 options. I'll let you pause to read. Of the 5 alternatives, the NWCM LCR would have the most cost or the most loss in power generation. CM would lose more than CS because of the distribution of the bypass, and LCR would have more impact than RM15 because they need more bypass water to meet the targets downstream. And generally, the power that's lost at the Glen Canyon Dam would have a ripple effect, and it would be felt throughout the Western interconnection power system. Because, again, a lot of power that goes to the west is from Glen Canyon Dam. So another problem that is facing Glen Canyon Dam right now is drought. So we can see here the bathtub ring that kind of shows or indicates how low the lake is. Precipitation in the western United States actually fluctuates, and wet years will produce a lot more power, dry years will produce less power. But luckily, in the west, drought is usually distributed, and so hydropower generation is typically still reliable. The lowest generation in the west was in 2001, followed by 2021, but it was predicted that in 2022 it would rebound despite the drought. So even though there's drought, power generation is still holding pretty strong in the west. So the Bureau of Reclamation recognized issues of drought. We can see from the elevation of the lake throughout the years that they've had to deal with drought in the past. So starting in 2007, there were interim guidelines, and that coordinated Lake Powell and Lake Mead to just make sure that the levels of both lakes were at capacity that would allow them to produce electricity. And it is still required via the Colorado River Compact that water is released despite power generation. So certain amounts of water do have to be released. And then in 2019, there was a drought contingency plan, and it can move water from the upper basin to be held in Lake Powell. And again, that sets a limit for how low Lake Powell can get. And you can see the operational tiers in that image there. So at the beginning of 2025, the lake was at 3,578 feet. The minimum capacity, again, for power is 3,490 feet. So they actually set a limit of 3,525 feet of saying, hey, we are not going to go below this limit because then power generation would be impacted. So a financial impact of drought could be significant, and that would significantly hit the federal power rate because a lot of the power that is generated at Glen Canyon Dam is going to federal agencies and tribal organizations. So here's the financial impact. So is it dam worth it? The energy from the dam can be used to facilitate renewable energy integration and mitigate emissions. It has, of course, some limitations, but it has less limitations than wind and solar. And it has less emissions than other types of power generation. And the Bureau of Reclamation says that they will not be decommissioning the dam or draining Lake Powell anytime soon. In my opinion, the dam is worth it. We need to have that electricity, we need to have that water management and that water storage in case of drought. And this dam in particular does a really good job of meeting their adaptive management plan and doing environmental mitigation. Thank you. Here are my resources.